Huw Edwards, and where do we go from here after what happened yesterday? The BBC has resumed its inquiry into Huw Edwards after the police confirmed they aren't pursuing any action against him.
Well, this follows a statement by Huw's wife, Vicky Flynn, naming him as the suspended presenter and revealing that he's in hospital with severe and serious mental health issues.
Now, this comes as a BBC investigation uncovers new allegations with claims he sent inappropriate messages to staff at the corporation that left them feeling uncomfortable.
Well, the journalist and broadcaster Sally Jones joins us this morning. Good to see you, Sally. I suppose then not only do the BBC need to conduct their own inquiries, but there remain serious questions of the way the BBC has handled all of this and perhaps even in their duty of care to Huw Edwards.
I think there are a lot of questions on both sides. I think it's become clear now that we're really dealing with two family tragedies. Obviously, the complainant's son, who was apparently sent these different messages, encouraged to do whatever by Huw Edwards, and also Huw Edwards' family itself, and Huw himself. I've worked briefly with him in the past, and I'm sure many of us have, and it's terribly sad to think that all this has been triggered by something which is apparently not even criminal, but the fact that he was not rung until last week by his own bosses when he was such a high-profile, high-level figure that he was having to suffer alone with his family. The knowledge that the BBC was covering his own private, what sounds like a tragedy, as a news story, rather than really getting to grips with him and simply allowing it to seep out bit by bit, makes you really question what their processes are and who was thinking what at the top of the corporation and also within their PR department.
But Sally, I'll just play devil's advocate with you. I mean, are they, there's that saying from the Bible, am I my brother's keeper? What has it got to do with the BBC, what Huw Edwards gets up to in his private life?
I think when you're that much of a public figure, people are very interested in your private life. If you were just Joe Bloggs getting up to whatever you get up to, that's not the same as, say, a total national treasure like Huw Edwards or any of the other high-profile BBC stars. The problem is that once your reputation is tarnished, whether or not there's been criminality involved, if you have a complicated private life, it never leaves you. Those sort of allegations will never leave you. And I think that the problem is that the BBC must have realised the knock-on effect onto Huw himself and his family, and not to ring him, not to contact him until last week, after months and weeks of speculation about what had gone on, what he might or might not have done, and to have his name almost public all over the Twitter and the internet, but nobody actually naming him, simply led to the feeding frenzy. And it must have very much exacerbated the dreadful feelings he must be going through. And the mental anguish he's obviously suffering.
Well, just taking into account all that you've said there about his public profile and how his wife has responded to this, Huw Edwards hasn't resigned. She said that he's going to address these accusations when he's well enough to do so. Where do you think this leaves the future for a man you term to be a national treasure there? Is there any way back for him, or is this the end of the road?
I'm afraid I think it probably is the end of the road, simply from a reputational point of view, whether or not he leaves the BBC. And I imagine that if his mental health is as poor as that, he may well be encouraged to do so. And I hope with proper support and with proper sort of input from the BBC, because this is one of their most successful, their most marketable, most loved stars, who has had this sudden fall from grace, whatever the sort of mental background to it. I don't think there's any way back. Eamon, you and I both worked with a very high-profile presenter back in the 80s, early 90s, who was caught out in a sun sting a national newspaper sting, and similar sort of, allegations of prostitutes and cocaine were made. And although nothing actively criminal was proved, the fact that suddenly the man who'd seemed like the nation's favourite uncle, the only image that people had was of him doing things with prostitutes and cocaine, made it totally impossible for him to remain working at the BBC. And even though he then attempted a comeback with another broadcaster, it didn't work. And I'm afraid that probably the same will be true for Huw Edwards. Whatever happens with his treatment, whatever happens with the BBC's treatment of him.
Yeah,
it's a very good analogy. I just want to say you were referring to Frank Boff there, who we were talking about. And, you know, as presenters, you and I would look and we would say this man was mercurial at what he did. He was absolutely amazing as an anchor. But all that forgotten, what he was remembered for then at the end of the day was bondage, brothels, drugs, and that was it. Just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, with Huw Edwards, there's no question he clearly is a national treasure in terms of his broadcasting prowess, but where the BBC kind of can't help but get involved is, you know, we're hearing, aren't we, these fresh allegations from staff members and saying that many of them were too afraid to report it to HR. Well, that has to be a big red flag for the BBC to really think about, and also the possible breaching of lockdown rules.
It certainly does. It'll be interesting to see if more detail on the alleged breaching of lockdown rules comes out, whether the police might then get involved with the treatment of staff, if that's true. One aspect of this type of case is it tends to flush out every other possible allegation from the woodwork, people thinking, oh, well, I didn't have the guts to do it, or I was too scared to do it at the time, or I thought I would be punished because he was such a high-profile person. Very much as in the case of Philip Schofield, those people will tend to come out at this stage once the any proclivities are made open in the way that they're being now. So yes, it will be, you know, it will be fascinating to see what more comes out. But I'm afraid it will not make it anything better for Huw. I just don't think there is a way forward, particularly with the fresh allegations, and that there are so many similarities to the Philip Schofield case, not least in the way that there was so much criticism of the way ITV handled that, and you know, the number of young staffers who had felt quite unable to come out about it.
Well, Sally, really appreciate you setting the scene on this today as to where we take things next, and providing your commentary and your experience as a former BBC presenter and someone who, as you say, briefly worked with or alongside Huw Edwards, and indeed alongside me. So we used to, this time of the morning, Sally would do the sport, and I would do the sport. That's right. So that's right. So listen, really appreciate you doing that. And what we're going to do, Sally, is to get reaction now from the viewers and listeners as to what they think should happen next and their whole opinion on all this. But we'll say goodbye to you and thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much.
Sally
and
Jones.
you know, in all of this, it really is worth saying how incredibly dignified and brave Huw Edwards' wife Vicky Flint was yesterday, making that statement. Can't have been easy.